Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
All right, today we're jumping into Great by Choice. Now, this isn't just another business book. It's the result of a massive 9-year research project that tackles one of the biggest questions out there.
Have you ever wondered why, in a world that feels so chaotic and unpredictable, some people or some companies just seem to thrive, while others, facing the exact same challenges, completely fall apart? That's the core question we're digging into today.
So let's talk about thriving in uncertainty. The future is always a bit of a mystery, right? But the authors of this book argue that we don't just have to react to it, we can actually create it. And this whole explainer is about the specific, concrete behaviors that let some leaders and companies do exactly that. So the researchers found the answer by studying what they call 10x companies. And what does that mean? It means these are enterprises that, in the middle of all this chaos, managed to beat their industry's average by at least, wait for it, 10 times. We're not talking about a little luck here. We're talking about a choice to build something truly great, even when everything is against you.
Okay, to really get a grip on this 10x mindset, the book uses this incredible, real-life story, the race to the South Pole back in 1911. It's like the perfect real-world experiment.
So you've got this tale of two explorers. In one corner, you have Roald Amundsen from Norway. In the other, Robert Falcon Scott from Great Britain. They had the exact same goal, facing the same brutal, unforgiving Antarctic wilderness. But the outcomes? Man, they could not have been more different. One team achieved victory and survived to tell the tale. The other met with defeat and death.
Let's look at Amundsen's method. This guy was fanatical about preparation. He didn't just guess. He went and apprenticed with the Inuit people to learn their survival techniques. He practiced relentlessly with his sled dogs. He built these huge buffers of supplies along the route, way more than he thought he'd need. He even carried 4 thermometers, just in case 3 of them broke. He was prepared for anything.
And then you have Scott's method. It was the complete opposite. He gambled on brand new, unproven motor sledges, which, surprise, broke down almost immediately. Instead of dogs, he chose ponies, which weren't suited for the conditions. His supply runs were calculated down to the last biscuit, leaving absolutely zero room for error, and he only carried 1 thermometer. 1.
And here's the kicker. The research shows that both teams faced pretty much the exact same weather conditions. So it wasn't the environment. It wasn't bad luck. It was their behavior, the choices they made. That was the difference between life and death.
And that story perfectly sets the stage for the book's central idea, which is that 10x leaders have a playbook. They have a specific set of behaviors for not just surviving, but actually thriving in chaos. And that playbook is built on 3 core behaviors that really separate the great from the good. They are Fanatic Discipline, Empirical Creativity, and Productive Paranoia. Let's break down what each of those actually means.
First up, Fanatic Discipline. This is about having an extreme consistency of action. It means you're totally focused on your purpose and your standards, no matter what the world throws at you. It's about having the independence to just stick to your plan day in and day out. Next, we have Empirical Creativity. This isn't about just having wild, out-of-the-blue ideas. It's about making bold, creative moves that are grounded in solid evidence. You observe, you test things on a small scale, you gather real data, and then you make your big move. It's innovation, but with a safety net.
And finally, there's Productive Paranoia. I love this one. It's about being hypervigilant. You're constantly thinking, what could go wrong here? But instead of letting that fear paralyze you, you channel it into preparing. You build cash reserves. You have backup plans for your backup plans. It's about turning fear into fuel. You know who was a master of this? Bill Gates. He once said, "I consider failure on a regular basis." Even when Microsoft was on top of the world, he was famous for writing these nightmare memos about all the ways competitors could absolutely crush them. That paranoia, that fear, is what kept them relentlessly pushing forward.
Okay, so how do these 3 things, discipline, creativity, and paranoia, actually work together in the real world? Well, it all comes together in a concept called the 20-mile march.
So let's use a simple analogy. Imagine you're walking clear across the United States. The goal is to march 20 miles a day, every single day. Now, on the days when it's scorching hot and you're exhausted, you still push yourself to hit that 20-mile mark. But here's the crucial part. On the days when the weather is perfect and you feel amazing, you hold back and march only 20 miles.
It's that consistency, not just raw intensity, that gets you to your destination first. And you can see exactly how this plays out in the business world with this chart. You have two companies. Company A, Stryker, had a 20-mile march, hit 20% net income growth every year. Company B, USSC, just went for broke, all out, explosive growth. And for a little while, USSC looked like the winner. But look what happens. Stryker's steady, consistent march leads to this incredible sustained success. Meanwhile, USSC's erratic pace, it led them straight into a collapse. The results are just undeniable. Southwest Airlines is another perfect example. Think about how chaotic the airline industry is. Their 20-mile march was simple: be profitable every single year. And they did it for 30 straight years. But just as important is what they didn't do. In 1 year, they had over 100 cities literally begging them to start service, but they had the discipline to add only 4. That's holding back. That's the discipline of not getting greedy and overreaching.
So when you look at all this, Amundsen and Scott, Stryker and USSC, it all builds to this one powerful central message. The difference between success and failure wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It wasn't the economy or the environment.
It all comes down to choosing to act differently. It's about being fanatically disciplined, grounding your creativity in real evidence, and being productively paranoid. That's the takeaway. That's the 10x playbook for winning when things get chaotic.
You know, after all that research, all that data, it all points to one inescapable conclusion. Greatness is not a matter of circumstance. It's not something that just happens to you. It is a matter of choice, followed by relentless, disciplined action.
And that really just leaves one last question. A question for you to think about. So what is your 20-mile march?
Have you ever just looked at a company and wondered, how are they crushing it when everything seems to be going haywire? Well, everyone else is just trying to stay afloat. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on exactly how they do it, based on some incredible research that totally flips the script on what it takes to win. So, our roadmap for all this comes from the book Great by Choice. The authors, Jim Collins and Morten Hansen, spent nearly a decade digging into this, studying companies in the most chaotic industries you can imagine. And what they found? Well, it's pretty mind-blowing. So let's get right into it. And this is really the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's not about doing well when the sun is shining and everything's predictable. Anyone can do that. This is about winning when the world is just throwing curveball after curveball. So what's the secret sauce? Well, I guarantee it's not what you think. The big breakthrough for the researchers came when they identified this very special group of companies. They called them the 10Xers. Now, these aren't just your run-of-the-mill successful companies. Oh, no. These guys are the absolute champions of chaos, and their stories are where we find all the answers. So what does it mean to be a 10Xer? You know, we're not just talking about being a little bit better than the competition. We're talking about a level of performance that is so far beyond the average, it almost seems unreal. It's just in a different league entirely. So here's the official definition. 10Xers are companies that, in ridiculously volatile industries, didn't just survive, they absolutely demolished their market index by a factor of at least 10 times. So obviously the big question is, what on earth were they doing that was so different? And what the researchers found was pretty shocking. It wasn't that these companies were more creative or bigger risk takers or had more visionary leaders. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. Nope. Their incredible success boiled down to 3 very specific, very disciplined behaviors. A playbook that, honestly, anyone can learn from. And here they are, the 3 core principles. The 20-mile march, firing bullets then cannonballs, and leading above the death line. Yeah, I know they sound a little intense, a little cryptic, but trust me, each one is an incredibly powerful strategy for dealing with an unpredictable world. Let's break them down one by one. All right, let's start with the absolute foundation of 10x success, the 20-mile march. This has nothing to do with huge bursts of effort or flashy moves. It's all about a relentless, almost fanatical kind of discipline. Okay, picture this. You're racing to the South Pole. Now, on a beautiful sunny day, do you just go as far as you possibly can? And on a horrible stormy day, do you just hide in your tent? Well, the explorers who actually made it didn't do that. They committed to marching a steady 20 miles every single day. In great weather, they actually held back to save energy. In terrible weather, they dug deep and pushed like crazy to hit their 20 miles. And that's exactly what 10x companies do. They set these non-negotiable performance targets and they hit them, year in and year out, no matter what. Okay, so once you have that bedrock of discipline, how do you innovate? How do you make big moves? Well, the 10xer approach is so smart, and it flows directly from that consistency we were just talking about. So you've got two basic approaches, right? You have companies that just fire these huge, expensive cannonballs into the dark. They're making these massive, unproven bets, just hoping one hits. But the 10xers, they start by firing bullets. These are small, cheap, low-risk experiments to see what works. They're gathering data, getting real-world proof, and then only when a bullet hits the target do they load the cannonball. They pour all their resources into something they know is going to work. It's genius. Now, for the third and final piece of the puzzle. This is all about a very specific kind of risk management. It's about knowing the difference between a bad day and a total disaster, and it's what makes sure the 10xers are always around to fight another day. And this is maybe the biggest paradox of all. You'd think these leaders would be huge daredevils, right? But they're not. They are obsessed with staying above the death line. That means they avoid any single decision that could kill the company, no matter how tempting the upside is. They build up cash reserves, they create safety buffers, they basically prepare for the worst. It's about making sure that no matter how bad a storm gets, you live to see the next day. You can't win if you're not in the game. Okay, so discipline, check. Smart innovation, check. Healthy paranoia, check. But what about that one thing that's totally out of our control? What about just plain old luck? I mean, you have to ask, right? Maybe these 10x companies just got dealt a better hand. Maybe they just got lucky. Well, the researchers looked at this very question, and what they found is maybe the most important insight of this whole study. Here's the kicker. The 10x companies were no luckier than anybody else. They had just as many lucky breaks and just as much bad luck. The real difference was what the authors called their return on luck. When something good happened, their discipline and preparation meant they could pounce on that opportunity and get a huge return from it. And when bad luck hit, well, that 20-mile march and staying above the death line meant they could take the punch, while their less prepared rivals got knocked out. So when you put it all together, that relentless discipline, the calculated creativity, and this masterful way of handling luck, you get to a really, really powerful idea. And this is it. This is the heart of the whole thing. The world is always going to be uncertain. Your industry will always be chaotic. But what this research proves is that greatness isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you build through conscious choices and fanatical discipline. And that just brings it all back to us, doesn't it? We can't control the economy. We can't control our competitors. We can't control luck. But we can control what we do. We can choose our own 20-mile march. We can choose to fire bullets before cannonballs. We can choose to always, always prepare for the worst. So the only question left is, what choice are you going to make?
Today, we're digging into a really fascinating 9-year study that asked a massive question. How is it that some companies don't just get by, but actually thrive when the world around them is pure chaos?
I mean, this is the question, right? In a world of constant turmoil, where markets can crash and entire industries get upended overnight, what really separates the ones who win, and win big, from everyone else? It's a question that keeps a lot of leaders up at night, for sure.
You see, the researchers behind this whole thing started with a simple truth. None of us can predict the future. So instead of even trying, they decided to figure out the core principles that let some people and some companies master their own fate, even when, and this is the key, especially when they have no idea what's coming next.
This analogy just perfectly captures their method. To get real answers, they didn't look at companies during calm, predictable times. No, they went looking for extreme environments. Because, well, when you're facing a killer storm on Everest, the real differences between greatness and just getting by become crystal clear.
So how in the world did they find these exceptional companies? Well, they went on this huge search, starting with over 20,000 companies, to find what they ended up calling the 10x companies. And let me tell you, the bar for entry was incredibly high. A 10xer wasn't just a successful company, it was a company that had absolutely demolished its industry average by at least 10 times and kept that up for more than 15 years, all while dealing with a crazy turbulent environment.
Let's make that real for just a second. Take Southwest Airlines. Over a 30-year period, if you had invested $10,000 in Southwest, it would have returned 63 times more than the general stock market. That is just a staggering, mind-boggling level of performance. So, after combing through literally thousands of companies, this is the elite group that made the final cut. You see some really big names here: Intel, Microsoft, along with other giants like Amgen and Progressive Insurance. These 7 companies were the core focus of the whole study.
But here's the thing. Finding these winners was only half the story. The really important part, where all the insights came from, was contrasting them with a direct competitor, a company in the very same industry that didn't get those 10x results.
Let's circle back to Southwest for a moment. I mean, just look at the absolute chaos their industry went through. You had fuel shocks, deregulation, strikes, brutal recessions, hijackings, and of course, the horror of 9/11. The airline industry was basically a graveyard for companies, but somehow Southwest thrived. So why them and not their direct competitor, PSA, which started with the same business model?
And this chart? Wow, this just says it all, doesn't it? That top line, that's the 10x companies. The bottom line? Those are their direct competitors. Just look at how those lines diverge over time. The gap isn't just big, it's an absolute chasm. So what on earth explains this incredible difference? Okay, this is where it gets really, really good. Because when the researchers crunched all the data, they found that many of our most deeply held beliefs about what it takes to succeed are, well, they're just plain wrong. They uncovered 5 surprising truths that completely shatter some common business myths. First up, this myth of the bold, visionary leader. You know, we picture these geniuses as these huge risk takers who just magically know where the future is going. But the data showed the complete opposite. The 10x leaders weren't bigger risk takers at all. They were more disciplined, they relied on hard evidence, and they were productively paranoid, always asking, what if we're wrong? Okay, myth number 2. Innovation is everything. We hear this all the time, right? But what's so surprising is that the 10x companies weren't always the most innovative. In fact, their competitors often had just as many new ideas. It wasn't about having a monopoly on creativity. It was about having the discipline to scale the right innovations and blend that creativity with amazing execution. Next up, this idea that you have to be fast all the time. Move fast and break things, right? Well, according to this research, that's a fantastic way to get yourself killed. The comparison companies were often reacting to every new trend with this frantic, panicked speed. But the 10x leaders? They understood that timing is everything. They knew when to hit the gas, but just as importantly, they knew when to hold back and be patient.
Now, this next finding is so counterintuitive, it'll really make you think. When the world is going crazy, our gut tells us to mirror that chaos inside our own company. You know, constant reorganizations, shifting strategies. But the 10x companies, they actually changed less than their competitors. They held on to this stable, solid core of values and practices, which acted like an anchor while the storm raged outside. And finally, we have the luck myth. It's so easy to look at massive success and just say, oh, they just got lucky. But when the researchers painstakingly tracked every single luck event, both good and bad, they found that both groups had about the same amount of luck. The critical difference wasn't the amount of luck they got, it was the return on luck. The 10xers were masters at spotting a lucky break and then capitalizing on it with ferocious intensity, turning a tiny opportunity into a huge advantage.
So what does all this build up to? What's the big, empowering conclusion? Well, it all comes down to a fundamental shift in our thinking, from trying to predict the future to focusing on how we prepare for it. And this, right here, is the ultimate takeaway. True calm, true confidence, it doesn't come from this fantasy that the world is suddenly going to become stable and predictable. It comes from understanding these core principles, from knowing that you are prepared for what you cannot possibly predict. And this famous quote from Peter Drucker just perfectly nails the entire spirit of Great by Choice. It's not about being a victim of your circumstances. It's about having the discipline, the creativity, and the productive paranoia to build something that lasts no matter what storms are on the horizon. The question then isn't, what does the future hold for us? It's, what will we create?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into what separates truly legendary leaders from everyone else. And our story starts with an incredible and deadly race to the very end of the Earth.
All right, let's kick things off with this really powerful idea from the polar explorer Roald Amundsen. This quote, it just perfectly sets the stage for our whole story because it completely flips the script on what we think of as luck.
So picture this. It's 1911. 2 different teams, led by 2 different men, set out on the exact same quest into the same brutal, unforgiving environment. But wow, their outcomes, they could not have been more different.
And this is where the puzzle really begins. You look at this, and it's just such a stark contrast, right? Amundsen,
victory and a safe return. Scott, defeat and death. I mean, both leaders had plenty of experience. They were facing the exact same brutal conditions. So what gives? Why did one succeed so spectacularly while the other led his entire team to tragedy?
Well, the answer wasn't luck, and it wasn't some random circumstance. It all came down to preparation. Amundsen, for example, he apprenticed with Eskimos. He wanted to learn what actually worked in the extreme cold. Scott, on the other hand, he kind of gambled on these new, unproven motor sledges, which, by the way, failed almost immediately. The differences in the choices they made long before they ever set foot on the ice were just profound.
And get this is the real kicker. When researchers look back, they found that in the first month of their expeditions, both teams had the exact same ratio of good to bad weather days. So no, it wasn't that Amundsen just got lucky with the weather. Not at all.
So here's the bottom line, the crucial point. The environment was the same, the luck was the same. The difference was their behavior. And, believe it or not, these are the exact same behaviors that separate today's most successful leaders from the rest of the pack.
Okay, so let's take this idea and see how it builds into a framework that researchers call 10x leadership. And what's wild about this is it's a mindset that doesn't just survive chaos and unpredictability, it actually thrives because of it.
But first, we've got to bust a few myths. When we talk about 10x leadership, we're not talking about the usual stuff you see in movies. It's not about being more creative or more visionary or more charismatic. Why? Because a lot of their less successful competitors had those qualities in spades.
Nope. Instead, 10xers are defined by one thing and one thing only, their results. We're talking about leaders who built companies that beat their industry average by at least 10 times. And those results? They come from a really specific triad of core behaviors that lets them thrive while everyone else is just trying to survive.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's break down this triad of behaviors that really separates the Amundsens from the Scotts of the business world. So here they are: Fanatic Discipline, Empirical Creativity, and Productive Paranoia. Now, what's so cool about this is how these three things work together. They're not just separate traits you check off a list. No, they actually reinforce each other. And they're all powered by one central motivating force.
Okay, first up, Fanatic Discipline. Now, don't get the wrong idea. This is not about being a rigid micromanager or creating a bunch of bureaucracy. It's about this relentless, almost obsessive consistency. It's about staying true to your goals and your standards, no matter what outside pressures are screaming at you. A perfect example of this is Peter Lewis at Progressive Insurance. Wall Street was pressuring him to play their little quarterly earnings game. But did he cave? No way. Instead, he just decided, you know what? We're going to become the first company to publish our financials every single month. With that one move of sheer fanatic discipline, he just took his company out of their game entirely.
All right, next up, we have empirical creativity. So what does this mean? It means you don't just follow the herd. You don't rely on conventional wisdom. You rely on evidence. You follow the data. You run experiments, you test things. So when you make a big, bold, creative move, it's grounded in a solid foundation of proof, not just a gut feeling.
And this is just such a powerful story. When Andy Grove, the CEO of Intel, was diagnosed with cancer, he didn't just do what the experts told him. No. He basically became an expert himself. He devoured the primary medical research. He sent his blood to multiple labs to test the tests. He drew up his own probability equations. And in the end, he chose a treatment that went against the grain but was backed by his own rigorous empirical analysis. I mean, he literally bet his life on his own charts.
And that brings us to the third and maybe the most crucial behavior of all: productive paranoia. This is that constant nagging feeling that even when things are going great, something bad is just around the corner. It's the unwavering belief that things will go wrong, so you'd better be ready. It's about taking that fear and channeling it into action, into preparation.
And this takes us right back to our guys in the Antarctic. Amundsen was productively paranoid. He carried 4 thermometers, just assuming one would probably break. Scott carried 1 and was furious when it did. Amundsen built these massive buffers of safety into every single part of his plan, while Scott ran everything dangerously close to the line.
So what does this look like in the business world? It looks like Bill Gates. At the absolute peak of Microsoft's power, when they were basically untouchable, he was famous for writing these nightmare memos, just obsessing over every single possible threat and competitor that might pop up on the horizon.
And then you have the flip side. The contrast here is just stunning. After a spectacular year at Apple, what did CEO John Sculley do? He announced he was going fishing for 9 weeks. So you have one leader who responds to huge success with more vigilance and another who responds with relaxation. It's a huge difference.
So, you have to ask, right? What drives a person to be so disciplined, so empirical, and so paranoid all at the same time? Well, it's not just some weird personality quirk. It's a very specific and very special kind of motivation.
This is the fuel that powers everything else. It's called Level 5 ambition. And what it means is that these leaders, they take all of that immense ego, all that drive and intensity that they have, and they channel it, not into making themselves famous, but into building something, a cause, a company, that is bigger and more enduring than they are.
And that's why their personality style really doesn't matter. They could be flamboyant and loud like Herb Kelleher, or super understated and quiet like Gordon Moore. The point is, when you ask the question, what are you in it for? For them, the answer is always about the company, about the work, about a purpose that goes way beyond their own personal gain.
So, when you boil it all down, the research is pretty clear. This 10x leadership thing, it's not about your background, it's not about being born a genius, it's about a set of behaviors that you can consciously choose to adopt day in and day out.
And so, we'll leave you with this final question to think about. Look at these 3 core behaviors again: Fanatic Discipline, Empirical Creativity, and Productive Paranoia. Which one is your natural strength? And which one do you maybe need to build up a little? Because on any uncertain journey you're on, whether it's in business or in life, the choice is ultimately yours. Are you going to be an Amundsen, or are you going to be a Scott?
Let me ask you something. When you're trying to achieve a really big goal, what's your gut instinct? Is it to just go all out, sprint as fast as you can whenever you get the chance? Or is there another way? Today, we're going to dig into this amazing principle that kind of flips our obsession with speed on its head, and it reveals why a steady, disciplined pace, well, that's the real secret to amazing long-term success.
All right, let's start with a bit of a puzzle. We are all, drawn to explosive growth. It's exciting, it looks great on paper, and it just feels like the fastest way to win. But what if that instinct is totally wrong? What if the real path to building something great is actually, well, a little bit boring?
To really get this, let's do a quick thought experiment. I want you to imagine you're an investor. You've got to put your money into one of 2 companies. They're in the same industry, they've got similar products, similar opportunities. The only thing you have to go on are the numbers. So, take a look. Company A, pretty respectable, right? A solid 25% average annual growth. But Company B, whoa, it is a rocket ship. It's averaging a massive 45% growth a year. I mean, the choice seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? Most of us would probably jump on Company B. But now, look at that second number, volatility. Company A is steady as a rock, while Company B is, well, it's all over the place. Does that change your mind?
Well, it definitely should, because this one chart pretty much explains the whole idea. If you'd invested just $1 in the steady Company A, which by the way is a real company called Stryker, it would have grown over 350 times. But that dollar in the high-flying Company B, it actually ended up falling below the market average. Slow and steady didn't just win here, it absolutely crushed it. So what in the world explains a difference that big? The research this comes from points to 3 core behaviors that great companies share. And the one we're going to zoom in on today is right there at the top of the pyramid, Fanatic Discipline. It's the engine that lets you power through any storm. But what does that actually mean?
Probably the best way to understand Fanatic Discipline is through this really powerful metaphor. It's called the 20-mile march. It's a super simple story, but believe me, it has some huge implications for how we should tackle any big, long-term goal.
Okay, picture this. You're about to walk across the entire United States, a 3,000-mile trek from San Diego all the way to Maine. You and a friend start on the exact same day, but you have totally different ideas about how you're going to get there.
Your strategy is dead simple. You are going to walk 20 miles every single day. Doesn't matter what happens. If the desert heat is just scorching over 100 degrees, you get up and you do your 20 miles. If you get hit by a crazy blizzard in the mountains, you bundle up and you march your 20 miles. And now this is the really important part. On those absolutely perfect spring days, when the weather's amazing and you feel like you could do 40, maybe 50 miles, you stop. You hold yourself back and you stick to your 20 miles.
Your friend, on the other hand, he's totally driven by the conditions, by how he feels. He gets all pumped up on day 1 and smashes out a 40-mile day. But then he's wiped out, so he takes the next day off because it's too hot. He basically waits for perfect weather, then he sprints to try and make up for lost time, burning himself out right before a big storm rolls in. He's completely erratic.
So who gets to main first? It's not even a competition. You, with your relentless, disciplined, 20-mile-a-day pace, you get there way, way ahead of him. Your consistency just destroys his intensity. And that, right there, is the 20-mile march.
So let's put a formal definition on that. A 20-mile march is a very specific performance target. And here's the key. It has a lower bound, that's a minimum you have to hit even on bad days, and an upper bound, a ceiling you refuse to break through even on great days. It's about having the ambition to push hard, but also the self-control to pull back.
Now, this isn't just a fun little story. This is a real, precise strategy that some of the most successful companies in the world have used. So let's look at a few examples of how this actually plays out.
Check out Southwest Airlines. Their 20-mile march was simple. Be profitable every single year. Now, in the airline industry, which is famous for losing billions of dollars, that sounds kinda crazy. But Southwest did it for 30 years in a row. And what about their upper limit? In 1996, more than 100 cities were literally begging them to start service. You know how many they added? Just 4. They held back on purpose to protect their march.
What's so cool about this slide is the contrast. Progressive Insurance had a march to maintain a thing called a profitable combined ratio. They hit that target almost every single year. Their competitor, Safeco, actually had the same discipline at first, but then they lost it. They started chasing flashy returns in the market instead, and you can almost see the exact moment on the graph where their paths split. Progressive stuck to the plan and just took off, while Safeco started to fall apart.
Hey, it's not always about money. Intel's march was all about technology. Moore's Law. They promised to double the power of their chips every couple of years. So during a huge boom in the early 80s, their rival AMD went crazy, growing twice as fast as Intel. But Intel deliberately held back. So when the entire industry collapsed in 1985, AMD was way overextended and got hammered. Intel, because they had saved their resources, recovered and never looked back.
Okay, so we've seen what the 20-mile march is, and we've seen that it definitely works. But why? Why is it so ridiculously powerful? Well, it really comes down to 3 huge psychological advantages that these marchers create for themselves. The whole magic of the march really boils down to 3 things. It builds this incredible, unshakable confidence that's based on actual results. It dramatically lowers your risk of some catastrophic event wiping you out. And it gives you this powerful sense of self-control in a world that often feels totally out of control.
First up, confidence. And I'm not talking about fake, rah-rah motivational poster confidence. I'm talking about the real stuff. It's forged by hitting your goals when things are tough. When you manage to march your 20 miles through that blizzard, you prove to yourself that your success depends on you, not the weather. You know you can deliver because you've already done it.
Second, it keeps you from blowing up. Holding back on a perfect day isn't about being lazy. It's about saving your energy and your resources. Think about it. If you're just hiking in a local park, going too far just means you'll be a little sore tomorrow. No big deal. But if you're climbing in the Himalayas, overextending yourself could be fatal. The business world and a lot of life is way more like the Himalayas. Storms are going to come, and marchers always have something left in the tank. And finally, self-control. Let's be honest, most of the world is completely out of our control. Markets go crazy, competitors do weird things, stuff happens. A 20-mile march gives you this one solid thing you can control. It's your anchor. It's like the explorer Amundsen on his journey to the South Pole. He's just 45 miles away, the weather's perfect, he could have made a final glorious sprint to the finish. But he didn't. He stuck to his march and went just 17 miles. That is the ultimate act of self-control in a wild, uncontrollable world.
What makes this principle so powerful is that it's not just for giant companies or famous explorers. It's a framework that any one of us can use to go after our most important long-term goals.
And you know, what's really inspiring is that it is never too late to start your march. The biotech company Genentech was full of brilliant scientists, but they were all over the place, no discipline, and they were constantly underperforming. Then a new CEO, Arthur Levinson, came in and basically installed a 20-mile march mindset. And the results? I mean, you can see the chart. They were just spectacular. It proves this is a skill you can learn.
Levinson himself summed up the entire philosophy just perfectly. He said, the only way we're going to get to where we want to be in 5 years is to make incremental progress year by year.
We've got to get 20% of the way there every year. It's not about some heroic push at the end. It's about that steady, relentless, consistent progress.
So all of this leaves us with one really important question to think about. Whether it's in your career, your finances, your health, that creative project you've always wanted to do, what is the one clear, measurable goal you can commit to hitting day in and day out, through good times and bad? What is your 20-mile march?
You know, we're always told that to win in business, you've got to innovate. You have to be first, be the most creative, have the biggest new idea. But what if that's not the whole story? What if sometimes that's just plain wrong? We're about to dig into a really powerful strategy that completely flips that common wisdom on its head.
And this quote from Robert Noyce, the co-founder of Intel, it really sets the stage perfectly. See, success isn't always about having this perfect vision and executing it flawlessly. A lot of the time, it's about discovering what works through trial and error, through real-world experience. And that idea of discovery, well, that's the thread we're going to follow today.
So let me tell you a story about an airline called Pacific Southwest Airlines, or PSA. Now, this was not your average boring airline. The pilots would get on the intercom and tell jokes. They once gave a live cow to their millionth customer. I'm serious, a real cow, right there on the tarmac. They were fun, they were zany, and they were wildly innovative. They basically invented the low-cost, point-to-point business model that customers and employees just absolutely adored.
PSA was the textbook example of what researchers call empirical creativity, which is really just a fancy way of saying creativity based on trying stuff out in the real world to see what sticks. They were the trailblazers, the pioneers, the innovators. And here's where the story gets really weird. PSA, the brilliant innovator, it doesn't exist anymore. It went bust. But get this, another airline came along, visited PSA, took a ton of notes, and then created, in their own words, a cut-and-paste procedure to copy PSA's model almost exactly. And that airline? Southwest. They went on to become one of the most successful companies of the entire 20th century.
So, how on earth is that possible? It makes no sense, right? The innovator fails, but the copycat builds an empire? It really forces us to ask a super uncomfortable question. Is our obsession with being first, with being the most innovative, is it actually misplaced?
And listen, this isn't just a one-off airline story. Take a look at biotech. On the left, you see Genentech. They were the innovation powerhouse, just crushing it with patents. But then, look at the chart on the right. A single dollar invested in their competitor, Amgen, performed over 30 times better. 30! Again, the most innovative company lost.
So it turns out, the research is crystal clear on this. In just about every industry, there's a certain threshold of innovation you have to meet just to be in the game. But once you're past that bar, being more innovative doesn't seem to guarantee anything. So if it's not about being the most innovative, then what is the secret?
Well, the answer isn't about choosing one thing over the other. It's not creativity or discipline. The real formula for success is about blending them together.
This quote about Southwest founder Herb Kelleher just nails it. He had the crazy creativity of the Irishman and the relentless discipline of the Prussian. That's the secret sauce right there. It's this powerful combination that explains why Southwest soared, while PSA's creativity, all on its own, just wasn't enough.
The real magic, what the research calls the genius of the and, is being able to be both creative and disciplined at the same time. They're not opposites that cancel each other out. They actually amplify each other. But okay, that sounds great in theory, but how do you actually do that?
And that brings us to the core strategy. And it's a fantastic metaphor you're not going to forget. Fire bullets, then cannonballs.
Okay, so what exactly is a bullet? Well, a bullet is just a small-scale, real-world test. And for it to count as a bullet, it has to meet these 3 criteria. 1, it's got to be low cost, so it doesn't bet the whole company. 2, it's got to be low risk, so if it fails, it's no big deal. And 3, it has to be low distraction, so it doesn't pull the entire organization off its main mission.
Let's jump back to Amgen for a second. In their early days, man, they were firing bullets everywhere. I mean, look at this list. They were testing viral disease treatments, a growth hormone for chickens, and even, I love this one, bioengineered indigo for blue jeans. It was kind of a scattergun approach, right? Because they didn't know for sure what would work. They had to experiment to find out.
And then, after all those little tests, one bullet hit the bullseye, a treatment for anemia called EPO. And that was the moment everything changed. They had real-world empirical proof. They knew it worked. And that is when they went all in, concentrating all their resources to fire a massive, calibrated cannonball to turn EPO into an absolute blockbuster.
So this brings us to the flip side of the coin, and this is where so many brilliant companies go completely off the rails. It's the immense danger of firing an uncalibrated cannonball, that is, betting big before you have that proof.
This is precisely where our innovator PSA got it wrong. Instead of firing low-cost bullets, they fired a series of huge, uncalibrated cannonballs. You can see it on this timeline. They made these massive bets on hotels and jumbo jets, bets that cost more than the company was even worth, long before they knew if they would pay off. These huge gambles left them with absolutely no room to move when the industry hit turbulence later on.
Here's exactly what an uncalibrated cannonball looks like on a chart. This top line, that's a company called Kirshner taking on a mountain of debt to buy another company. It's a classic example, a giant, unproven bet that leverages the entire company's future on a single outcome.
And here's the result. Predictably, Kirshner's huge gamble backfired, and their stock returns just cratered. Meanwhile, their disciplined competitor, Biomet, who avoided those kinds of bets, their stock soared. The data just screams it. Uncalibrated cannonballs are a recipe for disaster.
All right, so let's tie all of this together with maybe the greatest turnaround story in modern business history, the rebirth of Apple, because it is a perfect masterclass in this entire method. You have to remember, when Steve Jobs came back to Apple in 1997, the company was on the verge of total collapse. I mean, it was so bad that Michael Dell, his competitor, famously said this when a reporter asked what he would do with Apple. This wasn't just a company in a slump, people thought it was in a death spiral.
So what was Jobs' brilliant, innovative master plan? Well, it wasn't a huge innovative leap. The very first thing he did was instill Fanatic Discipline. He slashed products, cut costs, and focused the entire company back on its one core product that worked, the Mac. It was only then, 4 years later, that they fired a bullet, the iPod, which started as just a small accessory for the Mac. And only after that bullet proved to be a huge hit did they fire the real cannonball, launching the iPod and iTunes for the gigantic Windows market. See the pattern? Discipline, then bullets, then cannonballs.
So, when you pull it all together, what's the big, surprising takeaway? The winners, the companies that achieve massive success, aren't always the most innovative. And their leaders aren't necessarily visionary geniuses who can see the future. They're empiricists. They test, they learn, and they wait for proof. The real magic isn't just about coming up with creative ideas, it's about scaling that creativity with relentless discipline.
And that brings us to a final question for you to think about. In your own work, in your company, or heck, even in your own life, which of these behaviors do you need to lean into more right now? Is it firing more low-cost, low-risk bullets to find out what actually works? Or is it having the discipline to resist that big, exciting, uncalibrated cannonball until you have real proof? Thinking about where you are on that spectrum, well, that could make all the difference.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a concept, a mindset really, that can mean the difference between incredible success and, well, total disaster. And our story starts way, way up, near the top of the world. You know, this quote from Emerson, it just nails it. As soon as there is life, there is danger. It's this basic, fundamental truth that the people in our story today understood deep down, that life and business and, yeah, climbing mountains, it's all risky business. So picture this. It's May 8th, 1996. We're on Mount Everest, way up at Camp 3. And there's this guy, David Bregiers, who's a climber but also a filmmaker. And he's getting ready to lug get this, a 42-pound IMAX camera all the way to the summit. I mean, what a crazy thing to attempt. But then, as he's looking down the mountain, something catches his eye. And it's not what you'd think. The weather, it's perfectly clear. No, what he sees is basically a traffic jam. A huge group, like over 50 climbers, all making their way up right towards his team. And on Everest, a crowd like that can be really, really dangerous. And seeing that crowd just sets off all these alarm bells in his head. You can almost hear him thinking, right? What if a storm hits out of nowhere? What if all these people overload the ropes? What if we get stuck in a traffic jam up at the summit and can't get down fast? Even with that beautiful blue sky, something just felt off. The whole situation just didn't feel right to him. So, what do? Bregiers and his team, these are pros. They make a call that had to be just gut-wrenching. They decide to turn back. Can you imagine? They pack up their stuff and just head down. And on their way down, they literally pass two other expert guides, Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, who are leading their own teams up. And Hall and Fisher are kind of looking at them like, what are you guys doing? The weather's perfect. They're all confident, super optimistic, just pushing right on towards the summit.
Now, here's the thing. For Shears, he and his team went back up 2 weeks later and got their footage. They made it. But Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, they never came down. They and 6 other people died in this absolutely brutal storm. It ended up being one of the worst disasters in the history of Everest.
So that's the big question, isn't it? You've got the same mountain, same weather, all expert leaders. Why does one team walk away and another one doesn't? The answer isn't just about what happened in the storm. The answer, it turns out, is a fascinating idea called productive paranoia. Yeah, paranoia. It's this habit of always asking what if, of constantly preparing for the worst, especially when everything seems to be going great. And this isn't just for mountain climbers. It's a key trait of the most successful leaders out there, the ones researchers call 10Xers because they get results that are like 10 times better than everyone else. And this right here, this visualizes the whole idea. See, these 10X leaders, they aren't just trying to have good days. They are absolutely obsessed with one thing, staying above what's called the death line. And that's exactly what it sounds like. It's the point where one wrong move, one bad break can kill the whole company. It's game over. Okay, so this whole productive paranoia thing, this mindset, really comes down to 3 key practices. We're going to break them down. Building buffers, bounding risk, and this cool idea of zooming out, then zooming in. All right, let's dive into the first pillar. I love this analogy. It's all about packing extra oxygen canisters. And the key here is that it's about what you do before the storm even shows up on the radar. Think about it. Why could Bria Shares just decide to go down on a perfectly good day? Because he'd planned for it. His team had enough oxygen and supplies to try for the summit more than once. Hall's team, they were on a one-shot deal. They only had enough for one all-or-nothing push. They had 0 room for error, no way to back off and try again later. So what does that look like in the business world? Well, your oxygen canisters are your cash reserves. And check this out, the numbers are just staggering. When researchers looked at the books, they found that these 10X companies had 3 to 10 times more cash on hand than their competitors. They were basically paranoid about having that safety buffer. That's how important it was to them. Southwest Airlines is the perfect case study. For decades, their CEO, Herb Kelleher, was like a broken record, always talking about needing a strong balance sheet because sooner or later a catastrophe will hit. So going into September 11th, they were sitting on $1 billion in cash. Then the unthinkable happens. The entire industry is grounded. Other airlines are bleeding money, laying people off, but Southwest, they didn't have to cut a single job or a single flight. And they were back to making a profit in 2001 and 2002. They were ready for a storm, even though they had no idea what that storm would look like. Okay, so this brings us to pillar number 2, bounding risk. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it's kind of the opposite of what you'd expect. You probably think these 10X leaders are these huge, bold risk takers, right? Turns out, nope, not at all. And we know this from the data. Researchers analyzed a ton of decisions these companies made, and the results are crystal clear. 10X companies are way more cautious. Just look at this. They only took on death line risks, the bet the company kind, about 10% of the time. Their competitors, 36%. They were taking way, way fewer of those huge, scary risks. Yeah, this chart really shows it. These 10X leaders are just super disciplined about the kind of risks they're willing to take. They hate those death line risks that could just wipe them out. They avoid asymmetric risks, where the downside is huge and the upside is just meh. And they stay away from uncontrollable risks. That's exactly what that crowd on Everest was for Shears, a situation he couldn't control. So a huge part of managing all this is understanding what's called time-based risk. It's not about being fast or slow for the sake of it. It's about constantly asking yourself one critical question. How much time do I have before this whole situation changes on me? Let me give you a great example. A medical device company called Stryker. For years, they could see a storm coming. Big changes in healthcare. Did they panic? No. They patiently built up their cash reserves, their oxygen canisters, right? You can see it right here. Then, suddenly, the whole industry starts consolidating. Their window of opportunity was closing fast, but because they were ready, they could pounce. They made a huge acquisition that basically locked in their success for years to come. Patience, then decisive action. Okay, on to our third and final pillar, zoom out, then zoom in. This one's about a special kind of focus. You know that famous experiment where you're supposed to count basketball passes and you totally miss the person in a gorilla suit walking through the middle? Well, this is about being able to do both. It's like having two different camera lenses. 10x leaders can zoom out. They're always scanning the horizon, super aware of any changes in the environment. That's Bashir spotting the crowd. But then they can zoom in and become completely obsessively focused on executing a plan perfectly. Intel's Operation Crush is just a textbook example. They were facing this massive threat from their rival, Motorola. So what did they do? First, they zoomed out. They put a team in a room for 3 straight days to do nothing but analyze the threat and come up with a rock-solid plan. But once that plan was approved, boom, they zoomed in hard. We're talking over 100 people deployed all over the world on a mission, and they landed 2,000 design wins. They didn't just respond, they crushed it. That's the power of zooming out to strategize, then zooming in to execute. And that really brings it all home, right? It leaves us with a really important question to ask ourselves about our jobs, our teams, whatever we're leading. When you look out at the biggest challenges coming your way, do you have a real sense of how much time you have before the danger level changes? Are you building up your oxygen canisters right now? Because what this all teaches us is that productive paranoia. It's not about being scared of the future, it's about being so well prepared that you can own it. You know, we live in a world that feels like it's just in constant chaotic motion. And when everything is changing all the time, the common wisdom is, hey, you've got to change too, right? Radically and constantly. But what if that's exactly the wrong advice? What if the real secret to thriving in all this chaos is a surprising amount of, well, consistency? You know, this quote from the 17th century playwright Molière really sets the stage perfectly. It suggests that sometimes the things we do to fix a problem are actually more dangerous than the problem itself. And as it turns out, this idea is especially true for companies trying to navigate some seriously disruptive times. So just imagine for a second, you're Howard Putnam. You're the CEO of Southwest Airlines back in 1979, and the government has just deregulated the entire airline industry. I mean, boom, new competitors, price wars, total chaos everywhere. The pressure to completely reinvent your company just to survive must have been immense. So what do? Well, Putnam's answer was a huge, resounding no. He actually concluded that the very best thing Southwest could do was exactly what it was already doing. He called it the cookie-cutter approach. The idea was simple: find what works and then just do it over and over and over again with this relentless consistency. And listen, this wasn't some fluffy, vague mission statement. He laid out a list of really concrete, non-negotiable rules. Things like, we will only use 737s, we will turn our planes around in 10 minutes flat, no food service, no connecting flights with other airlines. It was a practical, super detailed recipe for success. So this whole cookie cutter idea, it actually has a name. It's called a SMAC recipe. SMAC stands for specific, methodical, and consistent. And it's not some high-level strategy or a core value. No, it's the durable, nitty-gritty operating code that turns your goals into reality. It's the how you succeed day in and day out. And this idea is not limited to boardrooms, not at all. To see just how powerful a SMAC recipe can be, let's go to one of the most unforgiving environments on the entire planet, the summit of Mount Everest. So you've got this filmmaker, David Brashears, and he had to shoot an IMAX film on Everest. Now, in that environment, just one little mistake could be fatal, or it could waste millions of dollars. His SMAC recipe was literally his lifeline. It included things like practicing with his camera and a sub-zero freezer, and always threading the film with his bare hands for precision, no matter how cold it was. This recipe imposed order on absolute, utter chaos. Okay, so the answer seems simple, right? Just get a good recipe and you're all set. But here's the thing. The research behind all this dug a lot deeper and it found something way more important. See, having a recipe, that's a good start, but it's not the real secret. And here it is, the crucial insight. The true difference maker isn't just having a recipe, it's adhering to it with fanatic discipline. It's this relentless, obsessive, unwavering commitment to executing that recipe day in and day out, especially when the pressure is on to change. It turns out mediocrity isn't an unwillingness to change, it's just chronic inconsistency. Okay, let's jump back to the airline industry, because this illustrates it perfectly. Southwest actually copied its model from another successful airline, Pacific Southwest Airlines, or PSA. They had almost identical recipes for success, but when deregulation hit, their paths went in wildly different directions. And I mean, you can see the result right here. Southwest, with that Fanatic Discipline, just stuck to its recipe, and its stock absolutely soared. PSA, on the other hand, the original inventor of the model, they got spooked by all the chaos. They abandoned their recipe, they tried to become more like their bigger competitors, and their performance just flatlined. They were eventually sold off and pretty much forgotten.
And this pattern isn't just an airline thing. Not at all. Think about the classic rivalry between Microsoft and Apple. From the mid-'80s to the late '90s, Microsoft was the very definition of consistency. Same leadership, same purpose, same smack recipe. Apple, during that same time, total turmoil. A revolving door of CEOs and a strategy that was just lurching from one idea to the next. And look at the result. Microsoft's Fanatic Discipline led to one of the most incredible runs in business history. Apple, having lost the discipline of its original recipe, faltered badly. They even came close to bankruptcy. The difference wasn't genius, it was consistency. And this pattern, it holds true across so many different industries. When researchers actually quantified it, they found this really stark difference. The super successful companies, they changed their core recipes by only about 10 to 20% over decades. The less successful companies they were compared to, well, they changed their recipes about 4 times more often, just lurching from one strategy to the next. This kind of fanatic discipline, it goes down to the smallest details. The legendary basketball coach John Wooden, he won 10 national championships. And on the very first day of practice, with a team packed full of All-American superstars, his first lesson was always the same: how to properly put on their socks and tie their shoes to avoid blisters. Why? Because in a championship game, the smallest little detail can be the difference between winning and losing. Okay, I know what you're probably thinking. This all sounds great, but isn't refusing to change just a recipe for disaster? In a world that's moving this fast, don't you have to evolve or die? And that right there is the critical question. The answer is a little nuanced. And this brings us to the key distinction. Great enterprises don't just throw out their recipe in a panic, they amend it. Think of it like a constitutional amendment. It's possible, it's a big deal, but it's done rarely, very carefully, and only when the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. Let's take Intel back in 1985. They made a massive company-defining decision to get out of the memory chip business and bet everything on microprocessors. But, and this is the important part, look at what stayed the same. The vast majority of their SMAC recipe, their commitment to Moore's Law, their R&D discipline, their culture, all of that remained intact. They amended one core ingredient, but they kept the rest of the recipe. You know, maybe the best way to really get this balance between consistency and change is to stop thinking about a company and start thinking about a country. A SMAC recipe is a lot like the US Constitution. It's a durable operating code that's built on what's been proven to work. It has a mechanism for change, right? The amendment process. But the bar is set incredibly high. And that ensures that any change is purposeful, not just a reaction to the latest crisis. This allows for both extraordinary consistency and really significant evolution over time. So the playbook here is pretty clear. You start by building a specific, methodical, and consistent recipe to impose some order on the chaos. But the real secret sauce, the true differentiator, isn't the recipe itself. It's the fanatic discipline to actually execute it. And when change is truly necessary, you don't panic and abandon ship. You amend your constitution, carefully and with purpose. Which really leaves us with a final question to think about. Whether it's for your business, your career, or maybe even your personal life, what is your clear, specific, and methodical recipe for success? Do you stick to it with that same fanatic discipline? And maybe most importantly, based on the facts, does it need a careful, considered amendment? You know, you ever wonder if the biggest winners out there, in business, in life, are just luckier than the rest of us? Well, we're about to dive into some really fascinating research that asks that exact question. And let me tell you, the answer is probably not what you're thinking.
This line, it just perfectly captures what we're talking about, right? That high-stakes moment when everything's on the line. When that one big opportunity or that one bit of bad luck shows up, what makes some people grab it and others just let it go? To really get this, we've got to start with a pretty intense story.
So picture this. You're with an experienced climber, a guy named Malcolm Daly. He is literally feet away from the summit of this insane, unclimbed ice wall. I mean, this is the moment of triumph after a brutal climb. He's at the front, leading the rope, feeling that victory. And then in just a blink of an eye, the solid world he was standing on just disappears. A handhold, a foothold. Who knows? All he knows is that he is falling. It's pure chaos. Ice screws are ripping out of the wall. He's bouncing, flying down this mountain, smashes into his climbing partner, and just keeps going another 60 feet into the abyss before he finally craters into the side of the mountain. The only reason he's alive? This. A sharp piece of rock had sliced through 10 of the 12 strands inside his safety rope. Just 2 little strands, thinner than a pencil lead, stretched like crazy, but didn't break. I mean, what an unbelievable, insane stroke of good luck.
So Daly's alive, but just barely. His legs are shattered. A storm's moving in. Then, another piece of luck. A plane just happens to be flying by base camp, which saves hours on the rescue. He makes it. So, was it all just luck? Or was there something else going on here? To figure that out, we need to get a really clear definition.
So, the researchers behind this came up with a really simple definition for a luck event. It's got to pass 3 tests. First, it happens mostly on its own, without you doing anything. Second, it has a big potential outcome, good or bad. And third, you just can't predict it. This simple little framework is what lets us start analyzing luck in a serious way. Okay, so this is where it gets super clear. Using Daly's story, the rope not snapping completely, pure dumb luck. The plane showing up right then, total luck. But surviving for 44 hours by doing non-stop exercises to fight off hypothermia, no, that is not luck. That is pure skill and discipline. And how about choosing a world-class climbing partner who could actually get down that 3,000-foot wall by himself to get help? That's skill. That's judgment. See the difference? It's a perfect illustration. All right, let's take this idea and move it over to the business world. Researchers used this exact same thinking to look at companies that just crushed their competition. We're talking beating their industry average by more than 10 times. They called them 10x companies. And they compared them to similar companies that didn't. So, did the winners just get dealt a better hand of cards? The very first thing they found was a total shocker. I mean, really, they went back and cataloged every single big lucky break these companies got over decades. And get this, the super successful 10x companies, they did not get more good luck. In fact, on average, they actually had a little bit less than the other guys. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, maybe they just had less bad luck. Nope. The data shows they actually had slightly more bad luck on average. This is huge. It means the amount of luck you get, good or bad, just isn't what separates the winners from the losers. And that leads us to the most crucial point of all this. The evidence is pretty clear. Luck doesn't cause massive success. People do. So the question isn't, are you lucky? The real question is, do you get a high return on your luck? And this idea gives us a whole new way to look at things. The return on luck matrix. You've got good luck and bad luck on one axis, and a great return or a poor return on the other. This creates 4 totally different scenarios. Let's walk through some real examples. Okay, let's start with Bill Gates. He is kind of the poster child for good luck, right? Born at the perfect time, right at the dawn of the PC age. His family could afford to send him to one of the only schools that had a computer. He saw the right magazine article at the right time. I mean, the guy was incredibly lucky. But here's the key question, the one the researchers really dug into. Was he the only one? Not even close. Thousands of other people had pretty similar advantages. The difference is, Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard, moved to Albuquerque of all places, and with this ferocious intensity, just threw himself at the opportunity before anyone else really saw it. He didn't just get lucky, he generated a massive return on his luck. Now let's look at the flip side of that coin, AMD. They were handed some extraordinary good luck. Their main rival, Intel, was stumbling badly. The market shifted in a way that was perfect for them. But what happened? They just failed to execute.
Again and again. They were late with their most important products, they couldn't manufacture enough chips, they totally squandered their good fortune. A classic case of a poor return on good luck. Now this is where the great leaders really show what they're made of. Back in 1988, a law passed in California that was basically a direct attack on car insurance companies. It devastated Progressive's business overnight. It was just a massive stroke of bad luck. But just listen to what their CEOs said about it. The CEO had this incredible insight. He realized that vote meant one simple thing: our customers hate us. And he used that brutal, painful feedback as a catalyst to completely reinvent the company. They created this immediate response team that could literally be at an accident scene in a few hours. They turned catastrophic bad luck into their single greatest competitive advantage. And that brings us to the last quadrant, which is the most dangerous one. This is what the researchers called the path to the death line. It's where companies are just unprepared, they're undisciplined, and they get hit by the same bad luck that everyone else gets, but for them, it's a knockout blow. It takes them out of the game for good. It shows that resilience, not luck, is really the signature of greatness. So how do you make sure you get a high return on luck? Well, the research shows it all comes down to these core behaviors you see in great leaders. Things like Fanatic Discipline, Empirical Creativity, a healthy dose of Productive Paranoia, and having the wisdom to test small ideas, firing bullets, before you go all in and fire the cannonball. These are the things that create a high ROL. And really, that brings us to the most important takeaway from all of this. You can't plan on being lucky. That's not a strategy. But what you can do is build the habits, the discipline, and the team that will be ready to make the most of it when it does show up, whether it's good or bad. That is a strategy. And what is one of the biggest, most important kinds of luck you can have? Turns out, it's not a what, it's a who. Remember our climber, Malcolm Daly? In the end, it wasn't some abstract luck that saved him. It was his friend Billy Schott who risked his own life. The luck of having the right people with you, in your corner, that's paramount. So as we wrap this up, that's a really powerful thought to leave you with. The right partner, the right mentor, teammate, or friend, that can be the single biggest factor in your ability to get a high return on whatever life decides to throw at you. So think about it. Who are the people who help you turn misfortune into strength and opportunity into reality? Who is your best luck?
You know, you ever look around and wonder why some companies, some leaders, just absolutely crush it in the middle of chaos, while everyone else is just trying to stay afloat? We always hear it's about luck, right? Or being in the right place at the right time. But what if that's not really the full story? Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to unpack the research from the book Great by Choice, and trust me, it pretty much flips the script on everything we think we know about success.
I think this quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It's not about being naive or ignoring how tough things are. It's about looking at a seemingly hopeless situation and deciding, nope, I'm going to make this work. It's a mindset that absolutely refuses to be a victim of circumstance.
And that really brings us right to the heart of it all. When the world is spinning like crazy and everything is uncertain, what's the secret sauce that separates the truly great from just the good? Is it all just a roll of the dice? Or is it about the choices you make day in and day out? Well, that's exactly what this research set out to figure out. All right, so let's start digging into that big question, luck or choice? But before we get to the answer, we have to talk about what most people think the answer is. You know, the conventional wisdom.
So the story we're usually told goes something like this. To win in a crazy world, you've got to be a bold visionary. You need more innovation. You need to move faster than anyone, and you have to take bigger risks. It's this idea of go big or go home. And it sounds right, doesn't it? It feels like that's how it should work.
But here's the kicker. The researchers dug into the data. I'm talking thousands of years of combined corporate history. And what they found was that all that conventional wisdom is mostly a myth. The data points to a path that's totally different, a path that's way more disciplined. See, the study found this elite group of companies they called 10Xers, and these guys weren't just doing well, they were destroying their industry averages by at least 10 times. And get this, they were doing it in the exact same chaotic environments as their competitors. So the question is, what were they doing differently? This slide lays it all out, and the contrast is just stuck. So where the myth says you need bold, visionary leaps, the 10Xs practiced what they called empirical creativity. Instead of just radical innovation for its own sake, they had fanatic discipline.
And instead of huge, wild risks, they operated with a healthy dose of productive paranoia. And here's the big one. They didn't get more luck. They got a higher return on the luck they got. Let's break down exactly what that means.
So the first core principle is called the 20-mile march. And the story behind it is fascinating. It comes from the race to the South Pole. You had two teams. One team, led by Amundsen, decided they would march 20 miles every single day, no matter what. Good weather, blizzard, didn't matter. 20 miles. The other team, led by Scott, would go really far on sunny days and then just hunker down and wait out the bad ones. In the end, Amundsen's team made it. Scott's team didn't.
So in the business world, a 20-mile march is about that same fanatic consistency. You set a performance target that you hit no matter what. That's your lower bound. It forces you to perform even when things are tough. But here's the part that's really counterintuitive. You also have an upper bound. You actually hold yourself back in the good times so you don't grow too fast, get sloppy, or overextend. It's all about relentless, consistent progress.
And man, does the data back this up. Just look at this. In every single case where a company had a 20-mile march in place before a big industry downturn, they had a good outcome, 100% of the time. Now look at the companies that didn't. An incredible 87% of them had a poor outcome. That consistency isn't just a nice-to-have. It builds the resilience you need to survive when things go south.
So how do you actually do this? Well, it's a system. It starts with what's called a hedgehog concept, that one simple thing you can be the best in the world at. Then you turn that into a SMAC recipe. That stands for specific, methodical, and consistent. It's basically your operating manual, the clear set of rules that keeps everyone marching in lockstep. And when you do that over and over, you get the flywheel effect, where you just start building this incredible, unstoppable momentum.
Okay, on to the next principle. And this is where we get into innovation and big bets. It's called fire bullets, then cannonballs. The idea is just so smart. Instead of betting the entire company on some big, unproven idea, you start small. You fire bullets. These are low-cost, low-risk experiments to test things out in the real world. You see what works. Then, once one of your bullets actually hits the target and you have real proof, that's when you line up the big cannon, concentrate all your resources, and fire a calibrated cannonball to turn that proven idea into a huge win.
Now, what's really important here is that the 10Xers didn't necessarily fire more cannonballs. The secret wasn't the size of the bet, it was the calibration. Look at this chart. Almost 70% of the big bets made by 10X companies were calibrated, meaning they were based on hard evidence from those bullets. Their competitors, only 22%. They were just firing cannons blindly.
And here is the punchline. The difference in results is just mind-blowing. Calibrated cannonballs, the ones based on proof, had an 88% success rate. Uncalibrated cannonballs, they succeeded only 23% of the time. That means they failed more than 3 out of 4 times. This isn't about being a genius who can predict the future. It's about having a system that removes the need to guess.
Okay, so that brings us to the third and final principle. And this is really the one that holds it all together. It's about survival, and it's called leading above the death line. This is basically that productive paranoia we talked about in action. 10X leaders are always thinking about what could go wrong. Even when things are great, they're preparing for a storm. They hoard cash reserves, they call them oxygen canisters, so they have air to breathe if things get bad. They manage their risks so that no single bad event could ever kill the company.
And yep, the data shows this plain as day. The 10X companies were way more conservative with their finances. Just look at the numbers. They consistently held more cash and had less debt. 83% of the time, they had a better current ratio. 90% of the time, more cash to cover their bills. This isn't the sexy part of business, but this financial discipline is what gave them the power to survive and thrive when others couldn't.
And the consequences of ignoring this stuff, well, they're huge. These principles are basically the perfect medicine to prevent the 5 stages of decline you see here. That productive paranoia keeps you from the arrogance of stage 1. The 20-mile march stops you from that undisciplined pursuit of more in stage 2. Firing bullets first prevents you from denying the risks in stage 3. It's a complete system for building something that lasts.
So where does this all leave us? How do we connect discipline, real-world proof, and paranoia? Well, it all comes down to one final, really powerful idea: your return on luck.
What the research found was pretty amazing. The 10X companies weren't any luckier than anyone else. They got hit with bad luck and they got blessed with good luck, just like everybody.
The difference was what they did with it, their return on luck, or ROL. When a lucky break happened, they pounced on it and squeezed every ounce of opportunity out of it. And when bad luck hit, they were prepared, and they minimized the damage.
And this, right here, is the big takeaway from all of this. We are not just products of our environment. Greatness is not something that just happens to you if you're lucky. It's something you build. It's a result of conscious choices and relentless discipline, over and over and over again. The power is in your hands.
So, let's wrap up with a question for you to think about. We know for a fact that disruption is coming. Uncertainty is here to stay. That's a given. So the only real question left is, what choices are you going to make? How are you going to use Fanatic Discipline, Empirical Creativity, and Productive Paranoia to get a high return on your luck?